The first thing I noticed wasn't the town. It was the road. I was halfway through my overnight review queue when a thin gray line appeared across a valley that hadn't shown infrastructure in years. The region was remote. Low ridges, dry forest, mostly monitored for wildfire activity. Nothing unusual ever showed up there, which is why the road stood out immediately. It wasn't dirt or a logging trail. This was paved. 2 lanes. Clean divider markings running straight through the basin. I leaned closer and checked the timestamp. 2:14 a.m. Overnight pass. Satellite array 3. I pulled the previous day's imagery and aligned the frames. The road wasn't there. Not partially built, not under construction, just untouched terrain. Scrubland, dry grass, and a shallow wash cutting diagonally across the valley. I frowned and pulled a second data set from another satellite. The road was still there. That's when I zoomed out. The road didn't just cross the valley. It led somewhere. A small grid branched from it near the center of the basin. At first, the shapes looked like compression artifacts, but as I increased resolution, they sharpened into something unmistakable. Buildings. Small, rectangular houses, evenly spaced along short streets. A few clustered near the center beside a larger structure with a flat roof and parking lot. It looked like a small municipal building, maybe a clinic or a school. I checked the timestamp again. 2:14 a.m. I overlaid the previous day's image. The valley had been completely empty. No roads, no structures, no ground disturbance, just untouched terrain. I sat back slightly, the low hum of the control room suddenly louder than before. Overnight review was usually routine. Wildfire monitoring, illegal logging checks, infrastructure verification. Entire regions sometimes went weeks without anything worth flagging. But this wasn't minor. I pulled radar imaging. Radar confirmed physical structures, clean geometric returns consistent with buildings and paved roads. I zoomed along the edges of the town. No construction equipment, no staging areas, no grading or soil disruption. The roads simply existed, cleanly placed across untouched ground. I opened the infrastructure registry. No permits, no filings, no utility requests. Nothing. I queued the nighttime thermal pass. The image loaded slowly, colors spreading across the valley. Cool terrain first, then the buildings. Warmth began to appear inside them, small heat clusters, human-sized. I leaned closer as resolution sharpened. Multiple homes, multiple signatures. And as the final data finished loading, one of them moved. I watched the movement for several seconds, waiting for it to resolve into something explainable. Thermal imagery can be misleading. Heat drift, sensor noise, compression artifacts. I'd seen all of it before. But this wasn't random fluctuation. The heat signature shifted from one side of the structure to the other, then paused near what looked like an interior wall. Like someone walking through a house. I checked the timestamp. 2:21 a.m. I flagged the frame and pulled additional passes. Different satellite, different angle. The town remained. I switched to synthetic aperture radar again. The structures reflected cleanly. Solid edges, consistent geometry, no distortion. Whatever I was looking at physically existed. I zoomed further into the residential streets. Cars sat in driveways. Not many, maybe 8 or 9, but enough to make the scene feel occupied. Their shadows aligned correctly with the angle of the pass. No duplication artifacts, no rendering anomalies. I shifted my attention to the perimeter. The paved road leading into town simply stopped at the valley edge. No connecting highway, no dirt access route. It just ended where scrubland resumed. I pulled terrain disturbance overlays. Nothing. No soil displacement, no grading marks, no equipment tracks. If this had been built recently, there would be scars, months of visible preparation. Instead, the terrain around the development looked untouched. I opened the nearest traffic camera network. The closest highway ran 18 miles north of the valley. Cameras covered both directions, logging vehicles overnight. I scrubbed back 6 hours. No trucks, no construction vehicles, no traffic turning toward the valley. Nothing. I returned to thermal imagery and increased contrast. More signatures resolved. Inside multiple homes, clustered shapes. Stationary, then shifting slightly. One near the larger building moved slowly from one side of the structure to the other. I checked environmental readings. No campfires, no generators, no heat sources outside the structures, just interior warmth. I leaned back, the unease settling in more firmly now. A town appearing overnight was already impossible. A town appearing occupied was something else entirely. The system automatically queued the next scheduled pass. When the image refreshed, I noticed something new. At the far end of the grid, near the edge of the development, a faint, warm signature appeared where none had been before. Small. Then another. They stabilized slowly, like shapes resolving into place. I watched the heat bloom into defined, human-sized forms. And then, one of them stepped forward, moving from empty ground toward a house that hadn't shown any activity minutes earlier. The next full satellite pass arrived 27 minutes later. I pulled the new frame beside the previous one and aligned the terrain markers automatically. At first, nothing stood out. Same ridge lines, same wash cutting across the basin, same grid of streets. Then I noticed the southern edge. A new road extended from the original grid, short, only a few hundred feet, ending in a small cul-de-sac that hadn't existed in the previous pass. 4 houses sat along it. I leaned closer, checking timestamps again. 2:48 a.m. I toggled between frames. The new street wasn't partially formed, it wasn't under construction, it simply existed. Clean asphalt, evenly spaced structures, shadows aligned with the rest of the town. No ground disturbance, no grading, no equipment, just added. I overlaid thermal imaging. The original homes still showed heat signatures inside. Then the new houses populated. Warmth appeared slowly, like the buildings themselves were cooling into place. Faint at first, then stabilizing into defined interior zones. One of the houses showed 2 distinct signatures forming near the center of the structure. They hadn't walked in. They hadn't arrived. They simply appeared. I shifted my focus to the center of town. Something else had changed. Near the larger building, the one I'd initially assumed was municipal, a small open space had formed beside it. Bright shapes resolved into something structured. A playground. Slide, swing set, small square of sand. I checked the previous pass again. It hadn't been there. I zoomed in, adjusting resolution to maximum. The sand looked smooth, undisturbed. No footprints, no drag marks, no shadows suggesting recent activity. Just perfectly level surface beneath the equipment. I felt the unease deepen as I switched back to thermal. Warm signatures appeared inside the larger building now. Several clustered shapes, stationary at first, then shifting slightly apart. Then, along the new cul-de-sac, one of the houses showed something different. The thermal bloom inside intensified. 1 signature, then 2, then 3. They formed simultaneously, shapes resolving into place inside the structure, not entering, not moving in, forming. I watched the feed in silence as one of the signatures moved toward the front of the house. The heat paused near the doorway. Then, on the optical pass update, the front door appeared slightly open. By the time the next scheduled pass arrived, I already had comparison layers prepared. The image loaded, and the town had grown again. This time, the change was larger. A wider road extended from the original grid, running east toward the valley's shallow incline. Several new structures lined the road, larger than the houses, spaced farther apart. One had a canopy shape consistent with a gas station. Another resembled a small commercial building with a rectangular parking area. I checked timestamps. 3:16 a.m. Less than 30 minutes since the last expansion. I overlaid all previous passes. The growth wasn't random. Each addition extended outward in the same direction, east, toward the ridgeline where the valley gradually opened into flatter terrain, toward the nearest highway. I pulled regional mapping overlays. The direction aligned almost perfectly with the closest populated area, a small town roughly 22 miles beyond the ridge. I felt a quiet tension settle in my chest as I toggled between frames. The development wasn't just growing, it was moving. I switched to terrain comparison again. The new road extended cleanly across the valley floor, no grading, no earth displacement. The asphalt simply existed, laid across scrubland that still showed no signs of disturbance. Then I noticed something, halfway down the new road. A vehicle, dark-colored, parked along the shoulder. I scrubbed backward. Previous frame, empty road. Next frame, vehicle present. No dust trail, no tire marks, just there. I zoomed in. Sedan, four-door, standard proportions. The shadows aligned correctly with the surrounding terrain, consistent with the rest of the pass. I switched to thermal. A warm shape inside the vehicle, driver's seat, stationary. I checked the next scheduled update. The vehicle remained in place. Then, on the optical pass, something subtle changed. The driver's side door appeared slightly open. I leaned closer. The thermal signature shifted. The heat moved from the driver's seat toward the open door. Then the shape disappeared from inside the vehicle. For several seconds, the road remained empty. Then, near the nearest structure, one of the new buildings along the roadside, a faint, warm signature appeared beside the entrance, as if whoever had left the car had already reached the building, without ever being seen crossing the distance. At 3:32 a.m., I escalated the anomaly. The request went through quietly, flagged under infrastructure verification rather than emergency response. We didn't have a classification for towns appearing overnight, and the protocol for unknown developments defaulted to remote inspection. A drone team stationed 2 counties over was assigned automatically. Estimated arrival, 41 minutes. I kept monitoring the satellite feed while waiting. The town remained stable, lights on, thermal signatures moving intermittently inside structures, no activity outside. When the drone feed finally connected, the camera opened on the valley from high altitude. Dawn light was just beginning to gray the horizon, the town below appearing calm and orderly. The drone descended slowly. The paved road looked newly laid, clean lines, sharp edges, no cracks or weathering. The houses appeared uniform, but not identical. Small variations in roof color, driveway length, mailbox placement. Normal details, but still no tire tracks, no ground wear, no signs of long-term occupancy. The drone moved lower, gliding down the main street. Cars sat in driveways, lights still on inside several homes. The camera adjusted exposure as it passed a front window. Inside, a kitchen table, 2 chairs pulled slightly back, a mug sitting near the edge, like someone had just stood up. The drone continued forward. Signal interference flickered briefly, A soft distortion across the frame, then cleared. The camera turned toward the cul-de-sac added earlier. The new houses looked identical to the satellite imagery. Still, quiet. Then, for a single frame, a figure stood in the middle of the street, human-shaped, featureless at that distance. The next frame showed empty pavement again. I checked the telemetry. No recording error, no dropped frames. The drone hadn't moved fast enough for something to enter and exit the street between captures. I switched the overlay to thermal. The display updated. At first, only the drone's own heat signature showed. Then faint shapes began appearing. One near a house, another beside a parked car. Then more. Dozens of warm signatures populating across the street. They hadn't been there seconds earlier. They formed gradually, resolving into human-sized shapes standing motionless along the sidewalks. The drone hovered, stabilizing automatically. Then another reading appeared on the telemetry panel. Ground elevation fluctuating. I stared at the numbers. The terrain beneath the drone was shifting slightly, not enough to see visually, but enough for the altitude sensors to register, as if the ground itself were settling or forming. I pulled regional overlays while the drone continued hovering above the town. The elevation fluctuation stabilized after a few seconds, but the reading remained slightly higher than the initial pass. Only a few inches, nothing dramatic, but enough to register as terrain change. I marked the timestamp and returned to the broader satellite view. The next pass loaded. The expansion had continued. New structures appeared beyond the roadside buildings, extending toward the eastern ridge. The road itself had lengthened again, pushing farther out of the valley. I overlaid the nearby population map. The direction aligned precisely with the closest town beyond the ridge. Population just under 3,000. A small grid, single main street, clustered residential blocks. I pulled a transparency overlay. The resemblance made my stomach tighten. The new development wasn't just expanding toward the town. The layout was beginning to resemble it. I zoomed in on the newest structures. The spacing matched suburban residential patterns. Slightly wider lots, longer driveways, curved side streets. Like a town being copied in sections. Then the system flagged an external data hit. License plate detection. County Road 14. I pulled the camera feed. A sedan entered frame, moving slowly along the county road that connected to the highway beyond the ridge. Early morning light revealed a dark-colored vehicle, similar to the one that had appeared earlier in the valley. I checked timestamp alignment. The detection occurred minutes after the drone recorded the vehicle in the new town. I scrubbed backward. No footage of the vehicle entering the valley earlier that night. No inbound traffic, only outbound. The sedan continued down the road, disappearing beyond the camera's range. I checked additional traffic sensors. Another detection. Then another. Vehicles leaving the direction of the valley. No inbound movement. I leaned back slowly, the pattern forming in my mind. The town wasn't isolated anymore. Movement was leaving it. I returned to the satellite pass. The newest structures appeared in a thin line extending toward the ridge, houses forming along the projected path between the two towns, bridging the distance. I overlaid both maps again. The new development was no longer just growing. It was connecting. Then thermal imagery updated. Heat signatures appeared in the newly formed structures simultaneously, and on the population overlay, the system generated an automated projection. Estimated contact between towns, 9 hours. The drone feed flickered again. When the image stabilized, several of the figures in the street were no longer stationary. They were all facing the same direction, toward the ridge, toward the other town. The next full satellite pass arrived just after sunrise. I overlaid the new image automatically, aligning both towns side by side. For a moment, I thought the system had duplicated the frame. The layouts matched almost perfectly. Same main road running through the center, same branching residential streets, same spacing between structures. The new town had continued expanding through the ridge during the last pass, and now the two developments sat within a few miles of each other. I toggled transparency. The resemblance wasn't approximate anymore. It was deliberate. I zoomed in to individual blocks, houses aligned with corresponding streets in the original town. Commercial buildings appeared in mirrored positions. Even the spacing of empty lots matched. But not everything was identical. Several structures existed in the new town that had no equivalent in the original. Extra houses, additional side streets, small gaps where the original town showed nothing, like the copy wasn't finished. I switched to thermal imagery. The original town populated first, scattered movement inside homes, typical early morning activity. Then the new town. Heat signatures appeared across the mirrored structures simultaneously. Movement patterns looked similar, clusters forming inside houses, shapes moving between rooms. The system flagged a new update. Population estimation, increasing. I pulled the traffic cameras from the original town. Morning traffic had begun. A few cars moved through intersections, lights switching off inside homes as daylight strengthened. Then I noticed something subtle. A vehicle pulled from a driveway. The license plate registered. Moments later, another detection appeared. County Road 14, the same plate, leaving the direction of the new town. I checked timestamps. The two detections overlapped. For several seconds, the same vehicle appeared to exist in two locations. Then the original town camera lost sight of it. The county road camera continued tracking it as it moved toward the highway. I sat motionless, watching the feeds update. Back on satellite view, the gap between the towns continued narrowing. New houses forming along the connecting road, thermal signatures appearing as they resolved. The system generated another automated projection. Expansion nearing completion. Movement patterns increasing. I zoomed out, watching both towns on the same screen. Heat signatures shifting, vehicles moving, lights flickering off in the morning sun. Then the system labeled the expansion trend automatically. Projected integration? Pending. I watched as the final structures appeared along the connecting road. The gap between the towns nearly closed. The new town wasn't replacing the old one. It was preparing to receive it. Some of the most unsettling anomalies never come from something loud or violent. They come quietly. A new road where there wasn't one before. A few houses appearing overnight. A development expanding slowly enough that no one notices until it's already finished. Because by the time anyone realizes what's happening, it's already part of the landscape. Satellite imagery updates constantly, new data every few minutes. Thousands of changes across thousands of miles. Construction, weather, development, erosion. Most of it routine, most of it harmless. But sometimes the systems flag something that doesn't follow any known pattern. Something that doesn't build. Something that forms. And if there are places like that, places quietly expanding beyond what we expect, we wouldn't see them all at once. We'd only notice when they got close enough to something familiar, close enough to copy it, close enough to connect. So if you live in a small town and one morning you notice new houses at the edge of town, roads you don't remember being built, lights on in buildings that weren't there yesterday, you might want to pay attention. Because the satellite systems only track what's visible from above. They don't track when something new starts appearing closer to the ground, or when it starts looking familiar, or when it starts waiting. If you enjoyed this story and you want more slow burn institutional horror like this, make sure to subscribe to Campfire Horror Stories and turn on notifications. There's a new story every week. And if you've ever noticed something that didn't seem like it belonged, a new road, a building, a place that felt recently placed, let me know in the comments. Because sometimes the most unsettling stories start when something new appears, and no one remembers it being built.